Here's a personal story, one which I've shared with some of you before. My grandmother was sold into slavery by her parents in China. And this was a common practice amongst the poor. Unfortunately, young women and female children were considered expendable. Today, we call this human trafficking. And when my grandmother arrived by boat as a young woman, the port authorities detained her. And they sent her to be with the missionaries at the Presbyterian Mission Home, which has now been renamed Donaldina Cameron House. This was in the 1890s. And she would eventually be matched with a respectable suitor from the community, of course, with the approval of the mission staff. I've become quite fascinated with history. I'm not sure if it has anything to do with aging, but I enjoy revisiting the past and pretending that I was there with the characters and the stories. I think this does several things for me. First, I become more appreciative of the sacrifices of my predecessors who have paved the way for me. Because without them, I know that I wouldn't be here. And secondly, as an Asian American, I've had to come to terms with my identity. Who am I? Am I an American who is Chinese? Or am I a Chinese person who is American? Well, that's an ongoing process. I'm not sure I'll ever figure that one out. The one thing that is clear for me is my identity as a Christian, a follower of Jesus. And for my history book, my primer is the Bible, filled with stories about my predecessors and their journeys with God. But there are also models and mentors in real time whom God sends. He doesn't know it, but a doctor I've been seeing for the past 20 years has been a wonderful role model for me. I call him Dr. S. I found him to be a very wise person. And occasionally when his patient load is light or someone has canceled their appointment, we would sit and talk a while. He told me that he once went to a Muslim country to mentor local doctors. I later learned that Dr. S is Jewish. And I asked him why he didn't go to a non-Muslim country. And he simply said, they needed me there at the time, so I went. And he added, sometimes we can't always offer an explanation for every choice we make. But we know in our hearts that it's the right thing to do. So I just keep doing what feels right and not wait for a reason to do them. And I thought to myself, this man's closer to Jesus than I am, and he's not even a Christian. Well, that's another sermon, isn't it? I remember reading an excerpt when I was in college, and I couldn't get it out of my mind. You know, it's like a piece of chewing gum stuck to the sole of your shoe. And you didn't want to touch it with your fingers, so you just kept, wiggling, moving, and sliding and slipping, and you couldn't get that piece of chewing gum. You couldn't get free of it. I was in my senior year, I began considering the ministry, even though I had been preparing myself to be a science teacher. Still, that excerpt kept coming back, and I couldn't shake it. And it went something like this. This claim that Jesus can transform our lives is either the most significant truth of all time or the most barefaced nonsense ever perpetrated on the human race. You can simplify that. Either Jesus was the real thing, or we all have been duped. You could get into a spirited argument on both sides, but in the end, you must follow one side or the other, because there's no neutral position. Someone has said, if you want to know where you're headed, just look down at your feet. There's no middle of the road. You can't straddle it. So you must make a decision and then rejoice and be glad in it. When Jesus reappeared out of nowhere to this group of very frightened disciples, he gave them the confidence they needed. Confidence for sharing the good news. Confidence that knowing that he was back with a promise that he would always be there for them. So I leave you with this familiar image of Jesus and his rejuvenated disciples, which Luke describes 2 times in this closing chapter of his gospel. Quote, "And when he sat down with them at table, he took the bread, he said a blessing, he broke the bread and offered it to them. Then their eyes opened wide and they recognized him. They recognized him." Amen.